All right, hey folks, welcome to The Flow, where professionals in the fastest growing companies come to discuss best tips to optimize your workflow. I'm your host, Tyler Koblasa, CEO at CloudApp here, and I'm here with our special guest, Scott Smith, CRO at CloudApp.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Scott, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So we'd love to kind of dive in a bit and hear a little bit, first off, kind of about your background and your journey in sales and revenue, and then kind of dive into some productivity tips and go deeper. So yeah.
Sounds great. So my story basically began when I was 16 years old. I was a fiend of technology, and every year for Christmas, I would ask my parents for like a new toy or gadget. And the one that I got that I loved was a Palm Pilot version 7. And this device allowed me to sit in my school, which had no Wi-Fi connectivity, no internet access, nothing. And I was the only one able to connect and get my email and stock quotes. But I was pretty excited about it. And as I progressed later and later into college, I worked for, I should say, I was sitting at a baseball game with my future father-in-law, and I had continued my love of mobile devices and gadgets, and he asked me a question about his new mobile phone. It was an HTC mobile phone. It was like a Windows operating system mobile phone. And he said he was having trouble with something, he was having a hard time with it, and I provided some insights and ideas, and we got to talking. It turned out he was a CEO of this really small three-person startup called Instructure. And I was going to school at the time in Utah at Brigham Young University, and the startup was a learning management software company. And basically, I worked for him as I would call it doing grunt labor, trying to find and identify their prospective customers. And it was my first real true experience working at a startup, and I was enamored and I kind of fell in love with it. And I think really what I loved most about that early experience was I felt like I was part of something that was moving and growing and changing, and that I actually was able to change and manipulate myself. And ever since then, with every company that I've been a part of, including today at CloudApp, I've always wanted to make sure that my participation or my influence or my efforts were reflected and seen. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was kind of how I got started. First started off as like this gadget consumed, obsessed kid. Happened to be dating this girl and went to this baseball game, and then things got going.
Awesome. So then you had a journey through a company called Dyn that was acquired a bit back by Oracle, and also spent some time at Facebook. So what was the journey kind of going from the early days into these companies?
Dyn was really interesting. So and actually, like one of the themes that we kind of talk about on this podcast is productivity. And one of the productivity tips that I think is really important is finding ways to build relationships so that you can take those relationships and lead them into your professional career. At the time, right before I graduated, my wife and I were trying to find my first job. Mm-hmm. I had applied to probably 50 companies, just cold email, cold call, etc. Nobody was being responsive. And I was TAing this class on financial instruments for this guy named Brian Sudweeks. And we were sitting in this small room, pretty much like this, and I was teaching him how to use the Bloomberg computer, the Bloomberg terminal. It's this really complex financial instrument, and great product. And basically, it allowed me to learn about this guy. And I was explaining to him I had no interest in going into finance. Mm-hmm. I just did not, even though I was teaching this class, ironically enough. And he said to me, well, you should talk to my brother, Dan Cook. And he recommended that I chat with him, and because he'd gone kind of a different direction. He'd gotten into venture capital. I'd never heard of venture capital before. Called him. He recommended I talk to this other guy named Kyle York. And Kyle York was the VP of sales at the time at this tiny 30-person company called Dyn, up in random Manchester, New Hampshire, which was like thousands of miles away from where I was going to school at the time. But nevertheless, I reached out to Kyle. Kyle was a busy guy. He's starting a new company. And he basically said to me, hey, this is what I want you to do. I want you to leave me a voicemail positioning and pitching why you would be great for my team. And I didn't know how to do engineering. I didn't know how to do software development. I had figured that the best or closest thing that I could do for an early stage company was find prospective companies and customers for them. So I spent like 3 hours, an hour of which was probably researching Kyle. I found out that he was a football fanatic. I found out that he had all these connections going back, and I basically left him after practicing about 100 times this 30-second voicemail. And he seemed to like it. He immediately connected me with his his director or manager of sales at the time, Josh Delisle, and things just got rolling. And eventually it turned out that they invited me to their office, and it was really cool. It had all of the amenities that I imagined a startup would have.
Yep.
Sort of. They had a Segway, which is really cool. They had like a little arcade machine. Every Tuesday they had what do they call them? Sandwich Tuesdays. So they had like a lot of great kind of fun things for their employees. But ultimately I didn't really care that much about that stuff. I was really there just because I wanted to participate early. And after my interviews on site, where I got to meet the CEO, the CTO, all the early founders, it was really exciting. I was trying to figure out like what to do. You know, you hear about maybe you should write everybody a personal note. Maybe you should follow up. And I was talking to my brother-in-law, Dan, who's a serial entrepreneur in Utah, and he suggested, why don't you send them something? I was like, I don't know. What should I send them? So anyway, I decided to buy and send 15 boxes of pizza for the entire engineering, sales, and marketing team, and just send it to them with a small note inside that said like, you know, great meeting you guys. I'd love to work with you and be part of your team. And that just sealed the deal for me. It was actually really hilarious. I got a couple emails from Kyle and Josh, both saying, hey, that was amazing that you connected with our team. And they just kept talking about you, the pizza guy. It took a little while to get out of that kind of reputation as the pizza guy once I joined the company. But anyway, that was how I got in.
Okay.
And that was like the first step. And I think I had to work really, really, really hard to get in for that first step. And I think kind of this personalization, spending work to craft your narrative and your message, for me, it really helped me, I would say, catapult or start my career. It was the catalyst for that. At Dyn, it was a really interesting business, much different than a lot of the Silicon Valley companies. It was bootstrapped, which meant that whatever money they made, they put it back into the company. It was profitable, which meant that they made more money than they spent. Again, kind of unique in the Silicon Valley landscape. And also they were doing effectively really what I would call boring or unsexy technology. But we all wore t-shirts that said DNS is sexy. So it was a company that made internet performance faster.
Yep.
And our customers were like Amazon and Microsoft and all these great Twitter, et cetera. But from that company, I got to work closely with all those founders that I mentioned. And I was able to have a mentor in Kyle York who taught me how to sell, how to do business development, how to build relationships and partnerships. And I think both really wanted and also really needed that at that early stage. Eventually, I wanted to move out to the Bay Area, and Kyle and Dyn both supported that for a while. And they basically said, why don't you open the West Coast office of Dyn? And I did, and it was great. And we actually got to hire a couple employees. There's like me, Derek, Kevin, and Will. We were all in an office that was, I don't know, it felt like 20 by 20. It's a dramatic difference between New Hampshire and the West Coast and San Francisco. But ultimately, I left and I joined this. I think I actually left the day that they raised a Series A $38 million round. Most of my friends were like, are you crazy? Why'd you leave this company? But I wanted to join another local startup. And one of our customers is the CEO of a company called Parse. And he recommended that I apply and interview. That company pretty quickly got acquired by Facebook. And then I entered into this very interesting and really great opportunity to work for Facebook for a few years.
Amazing. So on that kind of hiring process, getting to know the Parse team, what was that? You connected with Tikon, and you mentioned that there's some. What was that? How was the story? How did that come about?
Yeah, I think all of my application and hiring processes have been very similar. So with Dyn, it took me a lot of preparation and personalization on my work to actually show them that I was worthwhile. But I didn't have any experience. The pizza thing set me apart. At Parse, I actually had some experience having worked somewhere for about 2.5 years at that point. And what was really interesting is they had me come in and pose as though I were a salesperson at Parse and I was selling to Ford. And you had the CTO of Ford and the CEO of Ford and the head of marketing and the head of product for Ford in this room. And I needed to prepare a 30-minute presentation, slide deck included with my entire pitch deck, and be able to show the Parse team that I knew their product, that I could pitch it, and that I could answer objections. I still remember the CTO of Parse, Kevin Lacker at the time, basically asking me questions about their SLA and their uptime, which I had no answer for. But anyway, it was really interesting because I probably spent 15 to 20 hours, probably just way too much time. But I was really excited about the opportunity, and I made what I thought was a great deck. I've looked back, and even now it's not that great of a deck. But that experience was awesome. And one thing that was really interesting in talking with the team after that meeting was they really liked me and they wanted to hire me. But more importantly, they had basically told me that they had interviewed a lot of salespeople, and they found that those salespeople did not work well or seemed to come across to work well with the engineering team that they had. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on that. And I was actually kind of, I wasn't really sure exactly what was different about me, because I don't want to say that I'm dramatically different or special or better. But the thing that was unique, I would say, about me is I had spent that early experience at Dyn working with the engineering team, like literally daily. Mm-hmm. And these guys were actually writing code, so I could start to speak their language and I could understand their motivations and desires and the outcomes they cared about, so that when I actually interacted with the parse team, I didn't fit in naturally, but I at least could sort of appear to and try to.
Awesome. So when you were at Dyn and then also spending time at Parse, getting to know engineers and kind of coming back to your point around relationships, what was that like as far as kind of getting to know engineers, and how did you get to know them? And
there's this phrase, and I don't know who to attribute to, but it's basically never eat lunch alone.
Mm-hmm.
And at Dyn every Tuesday, I would always have lunch with the entire company. Parse, every day they had this nice benefit, which was basically to just eat lunch with the team. So I always went out of my way to kind of think about and follow that admonition, which was basically just to eat with the team. It was actually really simple, nothing dramatic. I just sat down, and in many cases I sat there quietly listening. Other times I'd kind of interject. I actually remember, how often I just didn't understand what they were talking about. And then I would go back to my desk excitedly and like read about that topic. I'm like, oh, what's an API? Or like, what is this load balancer thing? Or what's this elastic compute? That was a company that was heavily interested in AWS, Amazon Web Services, and building scalable infrastructures. And I just didn't know anything about it. So really it was just put the time in with the right team, or the team members that you want to build relationships with, and just ask questions, show interest in them. I mean, it all comes back to books like How to Win Friends and Influence People. Mm-hmm. It's literally like I genuinely wanted to get to know them, and I found the ways to do that. One of the engineers, Andrew Wang, great guy, who was one of our iOS engineers, super smart guy, and he wanted to go to the gym every day. I didn't go to the gym every day with him, but I would go 2 or 3 times a week, and he would do the craziest stuff. He would do 1,000 pull-ups, or like he would do like 30 pull-ups, and he would mock me when I wasn't able to actually do 10. Mm-hmm. Or Hanalei Adams, we would go running once or twice a week, and we would just run down to the Embarcadero and back. And when we had to walk, we would talk, and I'd get to know these guys very personally. And it was all about like lunch, exercise. Sometimes we do karaoke at night. Mm-hmm. I got really good at playing Mario Kart, which was like every Wednesday we had Indian food brought in, and we'd eat Indian food, and we played Mario Kart, and we got to know each other.
Was there a specific karaoke song that you would kind of go to, or?
I'm a big fan of Don't Stop Believin'.
Don't Stop?
It's like you can really belt it out and get excited about it.
Yep.
But yeah, I won't sing it here.
Okay. Now, kind of through that journey at, with regards to Dyn, so you were there, it was around 30 employees when you joined?
Yeah, it was about 30 employees, maybe $2 million in revenue.
Okay. And you were there about 2.5 years.
Yep.
And during that time, you guys were, I'm assuming, like testing many different things. Or when you walked in, was there kind of a set process, or how did you what was that like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like every company, if you were to ask the leadership would probably tell you, oh yeah, we got it figured out. We know what we're doing. From an employee perspective, I was working on my own laptop. I set up a standing desk using cardboard. And most of my efforts were basically, and actually this is very hacky, but I went in, I would open the terminal on my Mac or my Windows computer. I would then type in who is, and then the company domain. And then I'd get phone numbers and email addresses of the people who own those domains. Mm-hmm. And then I would cold contact them. And that's how we spent a lot of our time selling in the early days. Later on, I spent a lot of time taking our initial user base, of which we had a lot of free users, and I basically would try to identify the users who I thought might be a good fit for our product. And I didn't have anything sophisticated at the time, but literally I would just look at, okay, their domain is NewYorkTimes.com or a gaming company or Zynga, and I would then compose an email. And I had no idea how to write the email. I just made lots and lots of best guesses and guess and checks. And then interestingly, I would also use a Google Sheet to track, okay, I sent one email to these people. I need to make sure that I follow up with those people. So I basically had the hackiest of tools and nothing that was overly complex. But yeah, eventually we figured out from that, one of our best strategies, which was free users often work at big companies and they are happy because they love your product to introduce you to the leadership or the management of those products and companies.
Amazing. Now, Dyn was the DNS, like that app that was kind of built into like routers back in the day, and it was on effectively like millions of systems, right?
Yeah.
So you guys had a large pool to kind of go to, and they were already familiar with the brand. And as the product matured, were you able to, how did you handle the outreach to someone that might have an account using their router where it was potentially a prospect in a like larger company?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So the people who use the product, I would sit for, I just vividly remember this, but I remember I was sitting on the line on the sales desk, and I got a phone call that came in from an elderly gentleman. He's probably 65, 70 years old, and he was trying to set up his IP camera in his Wyoming home from his New Hampshire home, or his Maine or New Hampshire home. And I was like, hey, this is actually the enterprise sales line, but I was happy to help him. So I talked him through it for about 20 minutes. And I remember I get off the phone and, naturally I thought, oh, this is a waste of time. But I got to know the product a little bit better. So I think understanding our free user base really helped me understand the potential for what the kind of enterprise or SMB business use case could be. But what happened with the free users is we had almost like a couple different iterations of the product. So we had this, and if Kyle or any of the Dyn team is watching, I'm sure there's a much better history of this, but this is from my perspective what I remember. We had this free user base, and then you would connect your router and make it so that you could always remotely connect back into your home systems through that dynamic hostname. Eventually, we had a relationship with, I think it was Symantec, where every time if you had connected that router on your home DNS system, you could actually search through Dyn effectively, which would then route the traffic to Symantec. And what ended up happening there was we had a lot of traffic going to Symantec, and Symantec paid us for traffic to be able to show ads. Very, very simple. And then I think eventually Dyn was like, whoa, this is really cool. So we have people who are paying $10 a month for this dynamic thing that's essentially a freemium model. And then they had this sort of enterprise revenue model. And then as a result of the Symantec stuff, we started going to conferences and learning more about this enterprise business model. And it really allowed us to, again, go back to this idea of like being bootstrapped and profitable, and then start to identify great use cases that would allow us to slowly move into, okay, all right, well, there's companies that are about 100 employees, then 1,000 employees, and 500,000 employees, and beyond. We didn't jump the shark. We didn't do anything crazy and immediately get to the giant companies. But it was definitely incremental over, if I remember the company, it was been around 10, maybe 15, 20 years before the Oracle acquisition happened.
Wow. Now, as far as kind of strategies running that playbook, how did you guys think about how many times you would message someone, or how did you handle like follow-ups, or what was the kind of like, how did that kind of bake into your strategy?
Yeah, the strategy's really changed over the years. So with Dyn, we basically got email addresses of people who signed up, and it would be like a Gmail address. And at the time, I wasn't sophisticated enough, nor did I know that you could use tools now like Clearbit, or ZoomInfo, or Discover.org, or LeadIQ, and be able to take that email address and then actually relate it back to like Tyler Koblasa, the CEO of CloudApp, and he works at a company of 30 employees, and he's based in San Francisco, and his interests include kiteboarding, which it does, by the way. But at the time, it was literally just like I used Google Sheets. Actually, it wasn't even Google Sheets. It was we used I used a Word doc for my messaging, and then I would write it, and then I'd show it to my boss, and then I would email people, and I'd BCC my boss, and he would give me feedback on it. And for any of our like outreach or tracking, I think our email tool at the time didn't support email tracking. It was actually always a little bit annoying to our team, but anyway, we didn't have tools that allow us to, at the time, track email opens or replies. We didn't know fully, other than maybe the domain of the email, who we were reaching out to. And if they came to our website, we definitely had no idea that they had come because I had emailed them. What's very interesting, though, is from the time that I spent at Dyn to the time I spent at Parse to the time I spent at CloudApp, the technology has just transformed dramatically. So at Parse, we had, if I remember correctly, something like 600 daily signups. And I would scan those with my eyes still, just like I did at Dine. And I'd see Gmail, Yahoo, Yahoo. And I'd see New York Times. I'd get really excited. And then I'd reach out to the New York Times person and I'd see if I could set up like a feedback call. And that was one of my first and early, probably best routes of trying to grow our business, was just asking people that I thought from my eye would be a good target. And they would spend some time with me and maybe they would buy a $200 subscription. And then it would bump up into a $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 a month subscription. I'd say that the difference now with things at CloudApp, for example, we're able to leverage a lot of different tools. And at the very least, one of them is Clearbit, which is basically for every one person that signs up, I can always know who's using or who that person is. It's not always the case, maybe 20, 30% of the time, but I can see the company, how many employees are there, what their title is. And this really helps inform our business. Tyler and I spend a lot of time, creating pivot tables to look at the types of people who are signing up and trying our product, how much they're using our product. And then we reach out to them and say, hey, it looks like you're in customer support. How could we be serving you better? Or, hey, you're in software engineering. What kinds of integrations should we build? So these types of tools allow us to isolate and target and talk to the right people rather than spending our time spinning our wheels, reaching out to everybody. Now it's allowed us to really narrow our focus and get organized.
Awesome. Now, thinking about like kind of productivity and even kind of like techniques that you learned and kind of processes that were in place at Dine, and then some of those kind of takeaways that then kind of led into time at Parse. Any kind of specific kind of techniques or kind of how did you think about your day or your week, and also just kind of ways to kind of, because obviously there's infinite leads, infinite contacts, infinite opportunities, and it's a never-ending to-do list effectively.
Yeah, I think the two strategies that I've always had are, what are the outcomes that I want to achieve? And then the other one is, I need to make sure that I'm making progress towards those outcomes every day. And so at Dine, my first job was to get 10 to 15 new sales opportunities a month. Literally, I would cold email somebody, they tell me they were interested, and then I would pass it off to an account executive or a sales rep. At Parse, my job was to bring in X number of $1,000 in recurring revenue per month. And with each of these goals, I always had to back it into, how am I going to get there? And it usually involved thinking about like, well, at Dine, I needed to email. I think I emailed a lot of people back then. I sent a lot of email. And what's interesting is it was like me and Ryan O'Hara. Ryan O'Hara, even to this day, and I think he's right, he was a big proponent of personalization in email outreach. At the time, I was a bit of a knucklehead, and I would just cold email spam anybody's email that I could get with roughly the same message. And I liked to A/B test on these messages. And I think Ryan tended to be more on the side of like, I think with my personality and cleverness, I can get a meeting. What was interesting though was like, generally speaking, we had about the same number of opportunities. But I probably did a little more work and he had a little more fun. So anyway, I think going back to the question, for me, it was determine what your outcomes are that you need to achieve and focus intently and specifically on them. And then think about the daily activities that track against those. And I think like as a practical way of thinking about that, I remember when I was at Facebook and we hired this team member who after 2 weeks of working on our team, that person hadn't talked to any customers. They hadn't put together their pitch deck. And they were just waiting for somebody to tell them what to do. They were waiting to be trained. The difference is when I remember when I joined Parse, I think I walked in, me and Ilya took maybe 2 or 3 sales calls. And then he said, all right, you got this. And I was kind of like, whoa, what do I need to do? But I knew the outcomes and I knew the steps that I needed to take because of Dine. And what I ultimately did was I went into a room and I whiteboarded my ideas for a pitch deck based on the feedback Ilya had given me. I focused on what is the problem I want to solve for this customer. And I built messaging around it. And then I went to my marketing team and I said, hey, what tools do we have? What can we use? And it was interesting because I basically used a much worse version of the tool that we have now at CloudApp. But I actually can't remember the name. I sent a ton of email and the emails at Parse were basically like, hey, can I get some feedback on how you're using our product? And that always led into conversations that led to revenue. What I've tried to do or tried to realize is that you can't always just email everybody and ask for feedback and then hope. Now I think we use tools like customer.io to understand what is the right moment to reach out And then we use tools like Clearbit to understand who is the right person to reach out to. And then we use those pivot tables that I mentioned earlier to understand like who seems like they're using our product most effectively and who seems to be leading towards revenue. And I think we can take all of this data and all these great tools and make informed decisions to actually focus on the right things.
Awesome. Now, thinking about testing, so you mentioned one of your teammates was sending highly personalized messages. You sent more messages, less personalized.
Yeah.
How do you think about just testing in general? And, what's the phrase at Facebook? It's about how fast?
Move fast and break things.
Exactly.
I think now it's move fast with stable infrastructure.
Okay.
They got tired of the move fast and break things.
Breaking things. So without breaking things, but still being able to move fast, like how do you think about testing in, whether that be from sales, from marketing, from all different kind of practices throughout business operations? And
yeah, I think it's a challenging one. I have my perspective, and it's a little bit different. So one thing that's unique about CloudApp is it's a really popular tool that enables you to capture what you see and then share it with people so that they understand. And as a result, we have a lot of people signing up every day, and which allows me, as somebody who likes to test, a lot of great opportunities to test lots and lots and lots of times. I played baseball growing up. So from a baseball perspective, I can get many at-bats. So what I try to do is I say, all right, cool. We had X number of thousand people sign up in the last few weeks. I want to send them an email that says, how would, whatever the message is, I want the outcome to be this, going back to the idea of I want to think about the outcome. So if my outcome is I want you to buy, I'm going to send an email to those 2,000, 5,000 people and see, does it actually lead you towards that activity? And I'm also going to split test and say different subject lines. And I'm just going to keep the test relatively simple so that, one subject might be X and another subject might be Y, and maybe the open rates are better. Then I can get into the email and I can think about all right, does it need a simple text-based email? Should it have some images? But in general, the way that I think about it is, and I think Tyler and I talk about this a lot, it's test with pennies and then
build with dollars?
Build with dollars. Great phrase.
So test with pennies, build with dollars.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. But I basically try to do things in small batches with some of our user base to try things, see how they respond. And then if they work, if I can demonstrate that they actually demonstrably will result in a generally beneficial thing, then I say, hey, let's try it with a larger subset. And then we get crazy and then we try it with everybody.
Awesome. So again, coming back to some of the tools you mentioned, you mentioned customer.io.
Yep.
And then,
so I love Customer.io for some of our automated onboarding emails. Clearbit allows us to target the right people. So if somebody signs up with an email and I can say, hey, email them. Another one, going back to the days of Dyn, where I would have to mass email everyone, but never know if they read or replied. I use a great tool now called Outreach. And then for companies that I'm thinking about reaching out to and I don't know anybody there, I use products like LeadIQ to basically go to LinkedIn and I can say, hey, I want to get Tyler's information. I capture his email and then I can email him. So
awesome.
It's amazing, the tools today. The thing that's interesting though, just to kind of, I would say though, because of the tooling and the systems that people have now, literally everyone has the ability to have effectively like an AK-47. So it used to be like Civil War days. Everyone had muskets. You'd fire and then hope to hit the target.
Yep.
And now everyone is getting hit every day with millions of messages. And going back to Ryan, now they actually have to be really personalized.
Right.
Else they're going to drop and fail.
So just to be able to stand out and have that kind of personalization. That totally makes sense. Because if you just think about, there's more and more messages and phones. Some people answer random numbers.
I answer every call that I've ever made. So actually I had the VP of sales from Outreach cold call me one day, and we started talking one of the custom products that we use. Great conversation about a potential partnership. So I'm a big fan of answering phones, but I know a lot of people don't.
So kind of balancing email type of online reach out or outreach along with phone-based, kind of some hybrid of that. Now, I guess kind of last question around just productivity. And we have this time today where we've got tools like Slack. We all know the sound of a Slack notification and the ding from a text message and that beautiful red dot that is appearing everywhere. How do you kind of remain focused and also juggle kind of like coming back to like productivity, focusing on an outcome, and just in general, like what's your kind of practice around kind of productivity and focus and...
Yeah. So I think what I try to do is basically say, I know what I want to allow into my daily life, and I try to filter as much of that as I can otherwise. So like simple productivity hacks, like if the email contains the word unsubscribe, I'm going to filter it and go into a folder that I can look at later. Because every sales rep in the world is using tools now that has the word unsubscribe because they're obligated to. And I can look at all that sales email later. Same with Slack or the New York Times apps. Each one of these, they want to send push notifications to get in your life, in your experience. And I only allow the ones that are important into mine. So I think basically what I try to do almost weekly is think about what am I allowing into my space and how do I control it and how can I limit it? And then after that, what I do is I say, all right, I need to break down my time into buckets and focus on the outcomes that I want. If it's revenue generating, if it's if it's something around getting more potential customers, if it's just hanging out with a friend, maybe the hanging out with a friend should fit in at a certain point of my day, but maybe not when I need to be meeting with my team.
Got it. Okay. So again, just reiterating kind of main three kind of points around kind of as far as on the sales processes. You mentioned some degree of personalization.
Yep.
As far as like
personalization, test with pennies and buy with dollars, and then basically just focus on outcomes.
Okay. Awesome. Fantastic. And any kind of last kind of question here, any specific kind of like books or sources and just that you've read all around kind of saving time, productivity that are kind of personal favorites?
Yeah, this is actually kind of maybe not a great answer, but when I was 12, I read this. Well, I'll give two books, but there's a great book called The Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. And it's the story about a kid who crash lands in the wilderness of Alaska. It's either Canada or Alaska. I think it's Canada. And he has a hatchet, and that's basically it. And he has to survive and figure out how to win. And I think that can be an analogy for life where whatever circumstance that you're in, you have to figure out how to survive and get through it. And you have to have the mindset of a survivor. And that's what I love about that book. The other one that I'm a big fan of that I've been reading lately, actually I've been reading for a while, is this book called Team of Rivals by Doris Goodwin Kearns. And the premise is basically Abraham Lincoln brought in all of the people that wanted to take away his presidency, who wanted to win the presidency after his 4 years. And they were constantly trying to undermine him and prevent him from being a great president. But they were so sophisticated and clever and smart that he focused them into the areas of his business effectively that he needed to be done well. And as a result, his presidency was marked with such great success, and obviously as well great failure, but he was able to take the talents of the people around him. So rather than looking at the weaknesses of these people or that they're trying to kind of shut me down and knock me down, he saw the greatness within them, and he focused them on those things.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Scott, thank you for joining us on The Flow today.
Thanks for having me.
And if anyone wants to find you on the social medias, drop you a line. How could they get in touch with you?
So my name is Scott Smith. A little challenging to find that on Google, but I'm at Scotcha1 on Twitter. And on LinkedIn, you can find me with Scott Smith, CloudApp.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you for joining us on The Flow, and we are looking forward to have you join us next time, and have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you.